Well, a very good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where in the world you are tuning in from. My name is Adrian Reed, and I'm really pleased that we are joined today by such a sort of expert and varied panel on the tricky and thorny topic of business analysis careers. So you might be tuning in today because you're thinking of getting into business analysis for the first time, which can sometimes be a bit tricky because some employers seem to look for BA experience. And if you've got no BA experience, you can sort of get caught in a bit of a chicken and egg scenario where it's hard to get that first break. So you might be looking at it from that angle. Or you might be tuning in perhaps as a very experienced BA thinking, well, what next? Because it wasn't that long ago that people used to assume that, well, when you grew up as a BA, you became a project manager. But of course, we all know that isn't true. Project management is a different career route, and some people might want to make that transition, but there's so much more and many more things which are more aligned to what we do. So I'm very pleased to be joined this evening by Dr. Deborah Paul. I'm sure Debbie will need no introduction, author of many books with BCS, including, of course, the business analysis book, and the Human Touch, co-author and editor of many of the books in the BCS series, and of course managing director of Assist Knowledge Development, who I'm sure many people have studied with in their BCS diploma and other courses. We have Christina Lovelock, who leads the business analysis practice at the University of Leeds. She also co-authored with Debbie the 2019 BCS book, Delivering Business Analysis. Now, when I first picked up that book, I was intending to just read a few pages of it initially, and I was really drawn in, and I spent far too long reading it. It just drew me in. So if you haven't looked at that book, please do take a look at it. Well worth a read. We have the David Beckham, and I say the David Beckham because he is the original Dave Beckham, not that other footballer guy, who has a wide-ranging career in business analysis. Keynote speaker on change and business analysis, and in fact at the BA Conference Europe 2019 is probably the only keynote speaker to ever have got a standing ovation. So very pleased that Dave could join us. And last but by no means least, another name in the BA community that many of us will know and love, Lawrence Darville, director of Assist Knowledge Development, main organizer of the UK BA Manager Forum. Not actually a business analyst, although I guess we're all sort of BAs in one way or another, but has a background in HR, staffing, resourcing, all of these sorts of things. So welcome, Debbie, Dave, Tina and Lawrence, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. So our agenda, our plan of attack is to cover really 6 main topics. We're going to talk about how each of our panelists became a BA. We're going to talk about how people can get into business analysis if they don't have experience, whether there are types of BA, because we in the community we start to hear about like digital BA or agile BA. We'll talk about whether those things really exist. We'll grasp the thorny nettle of certification and progression, and then we'll finish off with some final thoughts. So let's get started, and let's find out how each of us became a BA. So I'll somewhat randomly pick Tina, because I know we've spoken before about this. You, if I remember correctly, have a really interesting route into business analysis, which if you'd be prepared to share with us.
Yeah, this is what I describe as the classic route into business analysis, Adrian, which is that I studied a master's degree in astrophysics, and then went to work for the local authority and became a BA within the NHS. So, and I was kind of only half joking when I say it's the classic route, because there really are so many different routes into business analysis. You can go to university or not, work your way up through a business. There's lots of different ways into it. And like many people, I started doing business analysis before I'd ever actually heard that phrase before. So I was involved in process mapping, data quality and data migration, IT system procurement and implementation. And by building up my skills in all of those areas, I realised that those things in combination equipped me to be a BA.
And was it a conscious career move, Tina, into business analysis, or was it more as much luck as judgment?
The roles that I'd been in were kind of project roles without a clear particular specialism. So it wasn't project management, it was kind of just general project roles. Then I moved into a much larger organisation which had specialist roles such as project manager and business analyst. And at that point, I was able to identify that business analysis was the role that I'd been preparing for somewhat unwittingly.
Yeah, yeah, that kind of natural gravitation, gravitational pull almost. So, okay, thanks. And Dave, so I know you've got a very varied business analysis career. How did you get into business analysis?
Completely by accident, Adrian, to be honest.
So many of us.
Yes, I think the predominant factor was getting thrown out of an administration department because I was asking too many questions, like, why do we do it this way? And surely we should do it more efficiently. So I think it was a case of being thrown out because I was just a pain in the neck, to be honest. And I was banished to a creative gulag across the city of Norwich, where my company Aviva, or Norwich Union as it was then, were creating a kind of a vision unit where they sent all the sort of creative heretics, I think. And I ended up in IT. Somebody gave me a bunch of post-it notes and a big piece of brown paper and said, model out the call centre process. And that was it. I became what was then a prototypical BA within my organisation. And then we had a big transformation program where IBM were involved, and they had community of practices. So they introduced the roles of project manager, designer, architect, business analyst. And I sort of gravitated naturally towards that and was one of the first BAs in my organisation. So I think it was something I was probably born with and ended up getting the job, which was a bit of luck, really.
Yeah, definitely, and it's interesting because you've plotted out a route, a sort of business route through to business analysis there, and so you will have had domain knowledge. Did you find like subject matter expertise as a BA? Is that a blessing or a curse, do you think, or can it be both?
I think it can be a bit of both. You know, Adrian, one of my favourite phrases is that we're specialists in generalism, and I think as a BA, you don't necessarily have to be a subject matter expert in the domain area you're working in, but I do think you have to be a subject matter expert in getting to the right outcome. So I think it's a behavioural thing. I think, you know, one of the things I said in my talk at the conference this year, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. And I think BAs don't have to be an SME. It can help to have those establishing conversations, I think, and build rapport. But in general, I think as long as you can get to the outcome you need and use the right tools to get there, it's not necessarily a problem. Having said that, I was in pensions admin and I did a hell of a lot of projects around pensions products. So, you know, it did help in that way.
Having that common language, that background.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Debbie, so what was your route into business analysis?
Well, like Tina, it was the classic route that nobody else followed. Because I started in a government department working on the operational side and always knew that I wanted to work in IT somewhere because I just thought it was so logical and I really loved the logic behind it. And so tried to find a way in, and a team was opened up where I lived that looked at implementation and deployment of systems and the changes associated with the systems. And that team was incredible because I learned so much about working with stakeholders, particularly people who were so nervous about technology, which at that time they were. So I worked on that team, and then I moved to become a systems analyst. But I knew a lot about the organization. You know, I was an SME. I'd also been a trainer in it, so I did know the subject quite well. And I also understood stakeholders a lot. And so working as a systems analyst, I just kept thinking we need to be very careful to make sure this will work in the business, that people will be up to speed with skills. And this was in the very, very early days. There wasn't a business analyst role around, really. And I just felt that that was the way systems analysts ought to work. So having done that for 2 years as a systems analyst, I then very naturally retained that holistic view, if you like. And that's where I really thought, this is the place I need to be.
Fantastic. So that sort of holistic nature. And it's interesting, as you were talking there, Debbie, about people being scared and reluctant about technology. I was so a random aside, but I was at the optician today, and I've reached that point in my life where I've been prescribed varifocals. And I went down, and they were explaining about varifocals, and they've got all of this software on an iPad to take certain pupil measurements or whatever. But the lady who was taking my measurements said, well, actually, I don't trust the iPad. I'm going to do it manually. And I sort of thought, wow, this major chain of opticians invested all this money on this thing, and they're not using it because the person isn't bought in. So maybe those things are just as relevant, or they're probably just as relevant now, I guess.
Yes.
So, fantastic. Okay, and Lawrence, I know you're not a BA by trade, but how did you become involved with the world of business analysis?
Thanks, Adrian. So this is going back, I traced back and counted about 18 years, give or take. But I really saw there was a bit of a nonsense that there was a very important role that some people were playing in organisations, but it wasn't really valued. The BA role was often a bit of an afterthought. And I specialised then around recruitment for BAs, and also set up a professional network because there were people taking their career very seriously. They wanted to share best practice, and that network grew into the BA Manager Forum. So it was something that just seemed on the surface such an important role, pivotal part to play, but no one was taking the role very seriously. I think if we fast forward to today, I think that's a very different picture, but possibly still some way to go as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I know the BA Manager Forum has played a huge part in getting that network going and helping, peers helping peers to get that recognition. So, fantastic. Okay, well, so some really interesting routes in, and I love this idea of the sort of classic route into business analysis, which is that there is no standard. As Tina said, you can go to university or not. You can come in through the business or IT or not. So okay, so let's move on to our next theme, which is, what if an aspiring business analyst has no experience? And this is something that I think you see on LinkedIn forums quite a lot, where there are people who really, really want to get into business analysis. They've really got the right mindset, but they're not even getting the interview. And potentially they're not even getting, their CV, their resume isn't even getting through automatic screening. So, Lawrence, I know you've a huge amount of experience in the recruitment field. If a candidate had no BA experience, how do they get their first foot in the door?
Okay. Thanks for that. There's no simple magic answer on this, but it is possible. So I've thought about this question quite long and hard and looked back at what some people have done successfully. So if you'll bear with me, I'll talk through. There's a few factors that I think will all help, but unfortunately, there's no simple answer. But here we go. So really, I think people have got to start with a very clear objective to wanting to break into their career, and they can't really be deflected from that. So there has to be, I think, some real motivation and passion as a start point. And then it's really treating this as a career change is something of a project. It requires quite careful planning. There'll be some very clear actions to take. So I'd be prepared to get your spreadsheet out for things you're going to do, companies you're going to contact, and these very clear action points. Now the plan will change because some routes won't open up, but it's then adjusting, and again, it's that motivation and passion to get the end role. There's a need for persistency, tenacity. You might have to chase up on roles by phone, attend evening events. I know the IBA events are very useful to make contacts. So there's that work. There are those opportunities, but there's quite a bit of hard work involved. I've seen quite a few people who, if they've been working for a larger company, they can ingratiate themselves with the BA team. So it might be attending their lunch and learn meetings. It might be as simple as taking cakes along to the BA team, or being that point of contact for BA project work. So there's ways to, if you like, move across within an organisation, and that's quite common. I do realise not everyone's in those large companies. You could complete some training to establish baseline skills. This isn't a magic ticket, it isn't a prerequisite, but it has some value. It also demonstrates how serious you are. I'll also mention there is a more formal entry route, which is the BA apprentice route, and those roles are advertised on the government website, and I can send that link to you afterwards, Adrian.
Fantastic. Yeah, and we'll post that link alongside the recording for anyone that's interested. So it's interesting. So as you were speaking, I wrote a few words down, Lawrence, and bizarrely they all begin with P. It's like passion, plan, persistency. It's about the people. And sometimes
having that. Oh no, we could have had 5 Ps.
Yeah, and I wrote the word pain because sometimes it's about being that person that keeps ringing and just keeps that persistency. So fantastic, thank you. So Tina, I know you do recruit, and you've run huge teams in the past as well. What would your advice be to someone who's perhaps never worked as a BA before?
Well, I think picking up on something that Lawrence said, that I think there's a real opportunity to create opportunities for yourself in the business analysis space. So there's a lot of roles where business analysis approaches and techniques can be used. For example, many roles have an element of decision making to do. So in that instance, it might be possible to apply a SWOT analysis, feasibility analysis, or a business impact assessment to build up the evidence base of opportunities of using business analysis skills and techniques, which can then be reflected on the CV, job application, or interview. And I think there's more direct ways of creating opportunities as well. So, for example, in my previous role, I was passed a CV by my HR department from a student who was looking for a 6 or 9 month placement for as work placement as part of his university. And because that was an opportunity that was put in front of us, it was something that we were able to follow up and facilitate. And so I think putting yourself out there, as Lawrence said, going to events, building up a network of people who are already in that role can lead to lots of opportunities, like the opportunity to put your CV in front of someone who will know about opportunities when they arise.
Yeah, so creating that opportunity, and I know this has been said so many times that it's almost a bit of a meaningless cliche, but the whole, the answer is no. If you don't ask, the answer is no. Yeah. So sometimes, and as Lawrence said, having the conversations with people inside the organisation, or just having the audacity to send the CV, you just never know. You never know. So
absolutely.
Fantastic. So, Debbie, from your perspective, what would you recommend to an aspiring BA who has no experience?
I think that the first thing people should think about doing is auditing their skills, because, as Tina said, it is amazing how in so many different roles there are a lot of business analysis skills used, and a lot of roles have to deal with people. In fact, everybody does. So you can actually audit the fact that you've maybe had to work in situations where you've dealt with negotiation between people, where you've tried to build consensus, where there have been customers involved. So you can often find that whatever the role, some of the skills are relevant, because the business analysis service portfolio is so broad that inevitably it touches on a lot of areas. So that's the first thing I would suggest people do. And sort of tying into that, it is helpful to understand the language of business analysis, and that helps you audit your skills. So, you know, I hate to say buy a book after my introduction, but it is quite a good thing to do, because you will then see what the terminology and the language is, and you will be able then to find, when you do audit your skills and your experience, where it is you actually have something to say on a CV that's relevant. So build the language and terminology. I absolutely agree with Tina. You know, people sometimes say to me, I'd never get the opportunity to do something. I'd never get permission to use a technique or do something. Well, if you really want to be a business analyst, there are opportunities everywhere to practice and to think and to gain experience. So look for opportunities everywhere. I mean, a service station, do some process modeling, because somebody needs to. So
yeah,
there is so much out there that people can do to actually start building something that will then make them a bit more attractive to a prospective employer. And I was actually approached by somebody a few years ago who was in a technology role, but not really in the IT industry, who wanted to be a business analyst. And we actually went through that process of auditing the skills. I had lots of discussions with him about language and terminology. He did some reading. He looked for some opportunities to really gain some sort of volunteer experience, and he walked into the first role he applied for.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And that's really interesting as well, because like there's a whole world of, like, even if, and I think just about every role is probably fair to say there's some opportunity for doing some business analysis. Yes. But even if there wasn't, there's a whole world of volunteering out there. You know, there are organizations that you can volunteer for in the local community, or get involved with a community project or something. You know, they're often crying out for volunteers, and if you can, you know, if you can engineer a way that they can use their resources even more efficiently, then that's, you know, a really great outcome as well. So so creating that sort of skills inventory and the terminology. Dave, what would you have to add from your perspective?
Well, I've got the curse of going last on this question, haven't I?
Sorry about that, Dave.
Where I'm going to just say I agree with everybody, but however, there are a few other things I'd throw in, and they're kind of more following on from some of the other points. The reading point is a hugely important one, and I think something to remember these days is there's a wealth of information out there in terms of blogs and LinkedIn posts. You know, I mean, the amount of information that's out there now that people are sharing and you can learn from is phenomenal. And I think it's just increasing all the time as people get more confident about what business analysis is. So I certainly recommend, you know, having a surf of the web and seeing what you can find out there on blogs, etc. And picking up on Debbie's point about the skill set. You know, you can do all sorts of things to improve your business analysis skills, because they're actually quite, you know, useful all the time. Something I tell people that I'm training or coaching is, if you're in a meeting, look at body language. Just look at the meeting. Look who's relaxed, and look who's tense. See if you can figure out who's got the most power in the room, who's got the most energy in the room. These are all things that BAs have to do, but they're things you can do in any meeting. You can think to yourself, has this meeting got a purpose? Because let's face it, a lot of meetings haven't. And BAs are there to set the purpose and set the objective of things. And even listening to the way people talk can give away a lot about how they think, and that helps you build rapport, which is another important skill as a BA. And people will say, I get the picture, or I see what you're saying, which indicates that they probably think in pictures. People might say, I hear what you're saying, or I don't like the sound of that. They probably think in words. So there are all sorts of little things you can do to build up your experience a step at a time. And they're just useful skills in whatever role you're in, really. So do your reading and practice.
So the reading and practice, and actually just to, before we move on to the next question, so just to echo and build on Dave's point there about blogs, from a purely personal reflection, I would say consider starting one. Like, I think one of the best decisions I ever made for my own learning was to start blogging, because in order to write, you have to really think. And I mean, I think probably all of us on the call here write or blog, and it's a great way of clarifying thoughts, and then your ideas are out there, and people will get in touch. It's it's amazing. So it's amazing what we can do to get content out there. Okay, so we'll move on to our next topic, which is probably a bit of a contentious one in the BA community. And increasingly, it seems people are talking about things like the digital BA or the agile BA or the insert whatever adjective you want here BA. So, Dave, do digital BAs and agile BAs exist? And if so, are they different? Is it a different role?
Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button there. I think they do, but and I think it's possible that the profession will go that way. There might well be data analysis BAs, there might well be digital BAs, but I think it's much more. That's almost like an organisational filter that tends to happen. I think a BA could probably pick a topic coming up in the next few years and really start to specialise in it, because we're seeing lots of things about, there was a lot more conversation at the BA Europe conference this year about ethics, for instance, the ethics of some of the things that are done. So, you've got the diversity aspect of things. So I think there might well be sort of professional specialisms, but you'll be surprised to hear that I've also got my own individual slant on it, in the sense of I think that BAs also have various blends themselves. I think, BAs are part diplomat, they're part teacher, because a lot of the time you're helping people through change. You become perhaps an organisational guru. They're problem solvers. Some of us a lot of BAs love getting in a workshop and pulling something apart, putting it back together again in either a scientific way or an imaginative way. We had a lot of things at the conference this year about creativity. So I think there's that type of BA. There's the artist BA, the person who likes doing the rich pictures, the person who likes painting pictures for people and showing them change that way. And then I think there's also one of the BA types can be a bit disruptor. Be it some BAs can be a bit of a trickster. They can go in there and perhaps trick people into thinking about things differently. And some BAs lead in almost revolutionary fashion in terms of disruption. We're gonna try this change. So for me, I think yes, there are professional types of BA, but I think there are also kind of behavioural types, and I think we all have those blends. But some of us probably prefer certain types of, the role, or certain parts of the role that favour those types. So that was a very long-winded and complex answer.
Well, no, I think in pictures, and I'm imagining different dimensions now, Dave. The behavioural dimension, and almost a functional or a project dimension, and the business analyst is like a chameleon intersecting all of those different colours or rainbows or whatever. So interesting. So Debbie, what's your take on this? Are there different types of BA?
I think there are different specialisms emerging, because business analysis, when it started, it was quite focused in a particular area. A lot of the work was around requirements, and then it just grew and grew. And business analysts started working in different areas. And so it is now quite a broad landscape, and the toolkit is huge. And most people, can't cover every single aspect of it all of the time. So what seems to be happening is that people are specializing in particular areas. One of the ways I like to look at it, as you mentioned in the intro, Adrian, is to think about the sort of service breakdown of business analysis, because what that allows you to do is look at particular aspects of the work and the particular value proposition and outcomes that aspect focuses on. So what you might have is a business analyst who maybe specialises in business process change, but then they may also have a specialism and specialist knowledge, say, in requirements. And so that might form their type of BA, if you like. And then it's possible that somebody in the more sort of requirements, maybe sort of system area, may have a lot of experience working on agile development projects. So they may see their sort of requirement service working in that particular environment. I've come across some BAs where their specialism is in business cases and feasibility studies. So what you tend to find is that a lot of it is dictated by the organisation and the way they view the business analysis services, and most BAs can't cover all of them. So they would tend then to specialise in a few areas, and that within an organisation might be wrapped up as a particular type of, or role of business analyst.
So a sort of broad universe of possibilities, almost a menu of options, with organisations picking the ones for their particular context, and sort of building it up that way. So, okay, fantastic. Tina, anything to add?
So I definitely agree that there are specialisms for BAs, but I also think that businesses are cyclic in their approaches. So organisations go through patterns of insourcing, outsourcing, onshoring, offshoring, centralising, localising. And I think that's something that's happening to us within the BA profession. So roles that were a lot more common perhaps a decade ago, things like systems analyst, requirements analyst, that you don't hear as much now. Those roles kind of came together. We converged on the BA role. We're now going through a diverging phase again, where there's a lot of different job titles in use. And at some point in the future, we might all converge onto something else. It might be back to business analysis, or it might be another role that emerges.
Interesting thought. The next wave, the next the next paradigm shift, as we might call it. So, okay, Lawrence, and I know you speak to a lot of BA managers at the BA Manager Forum. So, what's your perspective on this?
I think I'm going to echo quite a bit of what's been said already, but what I see is there's a fundamental or core BA skill set that's got those lot of those components Debbie was talking about, and it is this, if you like, BA plus, which is that baseline skill set with some additional specialism, which could be in data analysis, architecture, or BAs doing more work around the product or customer journey. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity, actually, because you've got those doors opening, and very often there's no obvious solution, but the BA already holds a lot of those skills, a lot of those baseline skills. So it's probably an easier step than lots of other people in different disciplines. The only other point I'd make is, if you look at that from the manager perspective, they can start to build teams where they've got BAs with a fundamental core skill set, but then you've got a team of people with different specialisms, and that gives you a lot of flexibility. So you've got both an opportunity for individuals to stretch their legs with new skills and different career opportunities, but that can also meet the needs of a team, and then really meet those team dynamics that are required to meet a broad range of demands from the business.
That's really interesting, Lawrence, and I know in the past we've talked about T-shaped individuals and having a breadth and a specialism. I saw a blog recently, and I can't remember who wrote it, but someone was writing about T-shaped teams, where actually you've got a broad balance of, coming back to Dave's point about specialised generalists, but you've got the core skills that everyone shares, a breadth that everyone shares, and then individual specialisms to balance out the particular needs. So
just a final point on that. If someone has got a genuine interest and passion in an area of specialisation, I would say absolutely go for it, because it's amazing how much comes your way in terms of that work when you've got the passion, and it makes your working day an awful lot easier. So it's there's lots of doors to be opened at the moment, and keep pushing away at them. Absolutely.
Sometimes they're only just closed. You start to knock on them and they sort of present themselves as very open doors. So. Okay, so then moving on to the thorny issue of certification, and we are probably all aware there's a whole range of certification options out there. There's the BCS International Diploma and Advanced Diploma. There's IIBA's competency-based framework, the ECBA, CCBA, CBAP. There's IREB, there's ISCI, there's all sorts of certification. I guess the question is, does it matter? Do we need it? And how does it fit in? Because there are folks out there who will sort of understandably say, well, I've been doing this for 20 years, why would I get certified? So Tina, if you met someone who said, I've been doing the job for 20 years, why would I get certified? What would your view be? Do you think that certification is valuable in that context?
Well, I think the analogy that I would make is, do you want a qualified electrician, or do you want someone who thinks they know what they're doing? And sometimes it's fine to have someone who thinks they know what they're doing, and sometimes you really need someone who's qualified and actually knows what they're doing. And there's an argument that qualifications don't guarantee that you get a good BA, but I think they provide a really good starting point for us to have a common understanding of the role, common language, show that commitment to the profession. And every profession requires both appropriate standards and qualification. Otherwise, it's not really a profession, it's just a job title that can mean all manner of different things to different people. And I think that's something that we need to really guard against as a profession.
Yeah, and if I reflect on my own career journey, I think when I started to, get certified, that was when I started to realise, I started to formalise a lot of knowledge. And that common language, I think, is something that's easy to overlook. But, it means that communication with peers is so much easier because we're all speaking the same language. So,
and it is a broad discipline, and I think all of us have got areas where we either have no knowledge or know that we could build up our knowledge, and a commitment via training, whether that's online training, personal study, or classroom training, is a really great habit to get into as a BA.
Definitely. So, Lawrence, what's your perspective on certification? Useful, mandatory, or a sort of white elephant?
Sorry, yes, you're right. I was going down the plumber route rather than electrician. But it's the same for an accountant or a lawyer. You'd want that level of confidence in someone's ability and to have that professional toolkit. So I don't see why any profession, BA or whatever we were talking about, should be any different. And I'm sometimes asked quite mercenary questions about the value of certification. Well, if it gives a career step, there's sometimes some quite significant uplifts in salary and roles of people who are using certification, using new tools and techniques to make steps in their career. So it can literally pay back several fold. It's something to think about if you are thinking purely in monetary terms. There's something else that I think is probably the most important thing. I think certification shows people have the tools and techniques, and I think that gives a confidence, and I think it gives an ability to take a lead role, and that confidence shouldn't be underestimated. And particularly today, there's a lot of social media coverage on well-being and mental health, and I think anything that gives more tools, more confidence in your working life is no bad thing.
Absolutely.
I really agree with that, Lawrence, and certainly members of my team that have gone through the diploma, for example, have felt that it gave them something, that it was an independent judgment that they were doing a good job, really, and particularly people who have got into it through a variety of different ways were sometimes left questioning themselves, am I really, what qualifies me to do this? Do I know what I'm talking about? Yeah, and it was a real confidence boost.
I maybe shouldn't say this, Adrian, but there are people I have spoken to who do BA roles for 20 years in a company, and their career builds up and their pay builds up with a lot of subject matter expertise. Changes happen in organisations, and it's not an easy conversation to have when you're falling back on knowing one system or knowing one financial product or part of the energy sector, and you've not got that breadth of skills, you've not got that toolkit to fall back on. And that's what's behind the certification.
Yeah, just echoing on something that you both said there. There's something about identity coming through as well, and I reflect on when I say again.
I have a bit of professional pride.
Well, and I think about two things in my own career, which I would think of as defining moments. One were when I started to study and get certified, and it's like, okay, actually, you know what, I can challenge stakeholders on this, because this is I am doing it right. Because I was formalising, and also another thing was when I first went to the first ever Business Analysis Conference Europe, and I then immediately joined IIBA, and it was like, oh, and there are other people that do this that I can speak to as well. So that sort of value of networking coming through as well. So Debbie, what's your view on certification?
Well, I do agree with everything that Christina and Lawrence have said. I think from personal perspective, I really believe in learning. And I think that sometimes people are a bit put off from doing certification because they don't want to do the exam. And I really get that because it's, sometimes people are quite nervous about it. But I actually believe that if you are working towards some sort of qualification, you do push yourself a bit more. And I'm speaking from personal experience here, but I know I do a lot of reading and I do a lot of thinking about business analysis and related topics. But when I'm working towards something that is actually a formal recognition, I seem to put that bit more effort in. And I really do feel, once I've achieved whatever I'm trying to achieve, that I've actually gained something because I've gone through a formal process that has introduced techniques and ideas that I probably wouldn't have encountered on my own. Therefore, I've gained a lot more. So I do think it's a worthwhile thing to work towards and to gain. The other thing, just to repeat something I think Lawrence said, we are a profession. We want to be a recognised profession. That requires us to be professional, and that requires us to be qualified. Because if we're not, there is a tendency to fall back on domain knowledge or application knowledge. And the toolkit for business analysis is very, very broad. And therefore, there are so many things you can do to help with so many different situations that sometimes without some sort of formal study, you don't know they're there.
Yeah, absolutely. They're unknown unknowns. They're in the blind spot. Fantastic. Dave, what's your perspective on certification?
I'm currently sitting under my desk cowering, actually. Because this is going to be my I'll get my coat moment, I think, because I only have one certificate. I've got one part of the diploma, because I've just never had the opportunity or the time to take it any further. I completely agree with everything that everybody else has said on here. I do think it is important to push yourself and to develop yourself. And I think the fact that we have got a brilliant certification framework available now, and the profession has become so much more professional, for want of a better term, with the apprenticeship and the certification that's available, I think it's great. And I certainly think people should pursue certification. To be honest, I'd probably fall into the category that Debbie mentioned. I just don't kind of dig exams as such, but I do dig learning, and I certainly enjoy studying and reading up on it. But the exam aspect of it has never really been my thing. But so yeah, I'm probably the black sheep in this conversation, to be honest, the one who's a little bit unusual in the sense that I haven't got a wealth of certification. So, but it's certainly a good thing. And I think if you in a market the way it is now, you do have to find the advantage, and certainly formal qualifications is an advantage to have.
Fantastic. I don't think
as I say, I'll get my coat now.
I don't think anyone would ever describe you as a black sheep, Dave. It's but fantastic. So a focus on learning there, certification to give the edge, to create that professional air, and as Lawrence said around professional pride, and even it having a sort of financial impact on salary or rate as well. Okay, so moving on then to progression within the role. And this is a really tricky one because, and it's one I've heard at many IIBA UK events and conferences. It's like, well, okay, so there's a fairly well-established route in many organisations of sort of junior BA, business analyst, then lead or senior BA or principal BA, and then head of practice. But of course, there's typically only one or a couple of head of practices. But it's like, well, what next? Where can a BA go? Lawrence, from your perspective, where have you seen BAs go, or what kind of roles do you think good, experienced senior BAs could, if they chose to, could go on to?
Well, I put together a slide a little while ago, and it actually only took me 10 minutes to pull this together. And I checked back on people I'd been linked in with as BAs maybe 10 years or more. Mm-hmm. And I was I was pretty gobsmacked actually, because you looked at sort of what are they doing now, and they ranged from business architect, head of data management consultant, change director, head of customer experience. The list goes on, and it's again back to that earlier conversation and thinking about those core fundamental skills and where that can take people. I think a lot of those people, if you looked at common denominators, had a lot of drive, a lot of interest in particular areas, and some passion to make moves in their career. But there's a whole host of opportunities there.
So almost the sky's the limit, really. Our imagination is the only constraint if we can use our transferable skills to take us where we want to go.
Absolutely.
So Debbie, what kind of roles do you see? Actually, I'm going to put you on the spot now. And what's the most unusual role you've heard of someone progressing to from a BA role?
Well, the one I always talk about, and thank you for putting me on the spot, Adrian.
I knew you'd appreciate it.
I don't think it's the most unusual role. I do think it's a title I haven't heard very often. But somebody once said to me that they were a portfolio architect.
Oh, wow.
And I said, what on earth is that? And they said, well, it seems very similar to a business analyst, but for some reason it's a new title. Okay. I think, though, if you think about what a portfolio architect might be, it might tap into the fact that some business analysts actually do work at a sort of a portfolio level, not looking at managing a portfolio, but looking at analysing the essence of what's in the portfolio and prioritising it and making sure maybe it's resourced so that where the priorities are, they're met. So that was probably the one that I haven't come across anywhere else. But it was quite an interesting one.
And what other sort of routes do you see people going into, Debbie? Sort of business architect or any other types of common role?
Well, do you know, I'm going to say something. I'm going to be a Dave Beckham and say something controversial here. Okay. You see, when I became a business analyst, and all those years ago when it was in the very early days, I actually decided that was what I wanted. I wanted to be a business analyst, and I wanted to be the best when I could. So at the time, it was a very, very typical route was to become a project manager. And I knew I definitely did not want to do that. But I've never actually changed my opinion. I've always thought being a really, really as good as you can be business analyst, being absolutely specialist, knowing your stuff, knowing the techniques, really being able to apply yourself to different environments and different services, to me, that's progression. And that's my take on it. And I don't understand why you'd want to go anywhere else.
Absolutely. So be the best BA that we can be.
Absolutely.
Tina, what's your take on progression within business analysis?
Well, I think we can focus a lot on creating next steps in business analysis and making the case for more senior BA roles within an organisation. I think a really great way to achieve that is by making the case for entry-level and early career roles, such as apprentices and grad schemes and other entry-level roles, to extend the career path in the opposite direction. And then by creating a good pipeline into the organisation, into the BA career, it consolidates the need for more managerial and leadership roles within the business analysis profession. So I think as senior BAs and BA leaders, by putting our time and effort into that early part of the career path, it will pay dividends later on within our organisations and help pave the way for more senior BA roles to exist.
Yeah, so
that sounds a little bit Machiavellian.
No, it makes total sense. It's sort of, you know, focus on the beginning of the funnel.
Yeah.
Invest in the beginning of the funnel. That's a really, really interesting take. Fantastic. And last but by no means least, Dave, what's your view on progression within business analysis?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, because certainly within my organisation, there's always been a glass ceiling. What we call principal BA, who is somebody who's normally aligned to a product domain or a product area or a large area of the business. And then there's this unwritten tradition that you have to go and become a project manager or a program manager or something like that, which to me is,
oh no,
yes, exactly, complete and utter tosh as far as I'm concerned. I think. Yes, I think more. We need more BAs, and at a higher level. I think I blogged on the subject. I called it the Praetorian BA. You know, the BA who is almost the bodyguard of the CIO. Somebody who sat on the shoulder of the CIO, saying, "Are you really sure that's a good idea?" You know, I mean, that's where I'd like. There may be people out there doing that role, but you know, I haven't seen it, unfortunately, in my own organisation. So I do think, you know, as Debbie said, why would you want to do anything else? When you're a BA, you're probably perfect for the job. If you like being a BA, that's the perfect job for you. And I think we do need to somehow find a way of breaking this myth about, you know, you have to go and do other bits and pieces in an organisation. I can see that you might want to gain domain knowledge, but BAs gain domain knowledge. You know, that's what we do. We ask questions and we listen. So I think it's a real challenge in some of the bigger companies to see BAs getting to that senior part of the ladder, which is a shame. You know, I think the only thing, and this is slightly tongue-in-cheek comment, is sometimes as BAs we're perhaps not very good at making decisions because we facilitate things a lot. Yeah. Which may be why we don't end up in sort of leadership positions that often, because we're much more prepared to discuss and weigh and facilitate a discussion rather than go, we're going to do that. So whether there's anything in that, I don't know. But I think, you know, BAs are suitable at any level in an organisation for progression. And it's a shame that there's these kind of urban myths about it.
It's really.
So I'll get off my soapbox now.
No. But echoing a couple of points you've made there, Dave. One thing that strikes me is I think often we're a little bit too modest, and we are quite. You know, we're very happy. We don't feel we need to be in the limelight and shouting about successes, and we're quite happy for others to do that, which is fine. But that means that sometimes, you know, I know it's an analogy that's been used before, but it's like the glue. Business analysis is part of glue, but glue's invisible until it fails. So you know, we need to make the glue visible to build on that analogy. So, and
maybe there's something we could do at a professional level. You know, maybe there's something the IIBA can do in one of the surveys about. Let's look at, you know, where BAs have really added value and see how we could potentially, you know, we could shout more about it. Just thinking off the top of my head, you know, success story.
Entirely agree, and I think one valuable thing any professional association, so if there is anyone from any professional association listening, could do is a series of case studies. You know, some research case studies to show the tangible and intangible value that business analysis bring, but put it into a digestible, you know, a long form and digestible 2-page for the to flash in front of the exec type of thing. But good. Okay, so time as ever is against us. So much we could discuss, but what I'd like to do now is invite you all to just give like a a 30-second or minute maximum final thought about, about BA careers. What advice would you give? What reflections do you have perhaps on your own career? What do you want to sort of leave people with? So Dave, what would your final thought for the webinar be?
No, I think for the webinar, if you're interested in being a BA, if you are a BA and you enjoy it, then you're probably lucky you're in one of the best jobs that you can have, certainly within IT and within any organisation. And for me, it's about having the belief in adding the value, and also, something that I've said to my managers throughout my career is that, I probably won't ask permission. And I certainly won't seek forgiveness afterwards. You've got to have the strength of your convictions, and you're there to deliver the best outcome for everybody, and keep on doing it, because if you enjoy it, then that's what you're probably very good at.
Absolutely. Lawrence, what would your final thought be?
I think to follow on from Dave a little in terms of keep doing those things that you're interested in and passionate about. I think there's some real power and energy to setting some clear objectives, where you want to get to genuinely, and then working towards those. It might take some time. There will be knockbacks, but keep thinking about those end goals.
So start with the end in mind and figure out the route, give it along the way. Tina, what are your final thoughts?
So I would say that if you want to progress your career as a BA, you might have to consider moving organisation. I'd encourage people not to stay in a role where they feel unhappy or dissatisfied with the role, and also not to be pushed into progressing in a direction that they know is not right for them, because life is short.
Yes, hear. That's a very, very important point. And last but by no means least, Debbie, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think from a career perspective, take ownership of it. I've always done that in my career. I've always thought, what is it I want to achieve? And I'll just echo something Lauren said. Sometimes it takes a while. There have been points in my career where I've taken a role that some people considered was a backward step. But actually, I felt on each occasion that it offered me an opportunity to gain some experience I didn't have. And that was really, really useful. So take ownership, look for opportunities, as we said earlier, and also, if necessary, put that investment into yourself, into your learning, and into developing your skills, because you're the only person who knows what you're passionate about and what you really want to do. So you have to take ownership and make sure you make it happen.
Interesting, and that whole theme of ownership and sort of really owning it is a theme that I think is emerging from what a number of us are saying there. And I remember earlier in my career, someone telling me, it's one of those phrases that's always stuck with me, which is like, if you're not managing your career, then your manager is. And is that something you really want? Which is an interesting thought, perhaps, for us to finish on. So all that's really left for me to do now is to say a massive thank you. Obviously, thank you to Debbie, Tina, and Dave and Lawrence for being part of the webinar. Really, really, really do appreciate it. In terms of registrations, this was, one of the best attended webinars I think we've ever done. So it's clearly a topic that's of interest. And thank you for sharing your insights so openly and making time in your busy diaries to be here this evening. Also, a massive thank you to everyone who has tuned in live and to people who are watching the recording as well.